The Salem witch trials of 1692 remain one of the darkest and most haunting episodes in American history. It was a time when fear, superstition, and religious extremism combined to fuel one of the most horrifying witch hunts in history. At the heart of this frenzy were the terrifying accusations of witchcraft, which led to the execution of 20 innocent people and the devastation of countless others. The events unfolded swiftly, with a venomous combination of paranoia, personal grievances, and the unchecked power of religious leaders. In the name of justice, lives were destroyed, families torn apart, and a community forever scarred. This video will explore the terrifying history of the Salem witch trials, delving into the fear and madness that drove people to make unbelievable accusations, the horrifying trials, and the lasting legacy of this chapter in history. We will visit the places where the trials took place, retrace the steps of the accused, and uncover the unsettling truth behind this terrifying period in American history. Salem, Massachusetts, in the late 17th century, was a community on edge. It was a small Puritan settlement dominated by strict religious beliefs and a belief in the constant presence of evil. Puritans viewed the world through a lens of black and white morality, where the forces of good and evil were constantly at war. The settlers lived in constant fear of witches, demons, and the devil himself, who they believed were lurking, waiting for the chance to corrupt the pure. The community's fears were not unwarranted. The Salem colony had experienced a series of hardships that seemed to stretch the limits of human endurance: harsh winters, food shortages, and disease. The inhabitants were living in constant tension, struggling to keep the peace and maintain control over the growing threat of the unknown. At the same time, there was a sense of isolation. The Puritans were deeply suspicious of outsiders and believed in the need for strict, unquestioned loyalty to their religious leaders. This fear of the unknown, combined with growing anxiety over social and political issues, created a perfect storm for the eruption of one of the most notorious witch hunts in history. The spark that ignited the Salem witch trials was a series of mysterious and terrifying fits exhibited by a group of young girls in Salem Village. In January 1692, a group of girls, including Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams, began displaying strange behaviors, screaming, convulsing, throwing themselves into violent fits, and claiming to see specters, or ghosts, tormenting them. They described being bewitched by invisible forces and were quick to point fingers at women in the community, accusing them of witchcraft. What began as a small, isolated incident quickly spiraled out of control. The girls' wild accusations spread like wildfire, fueled by the growing fear that the devil had infiltrated their society. Their claims were so vivid, so terrifying, that the Puritans began to believe they were seeing a manifestation of the devil himself. Soon, the accused women were being dragged from their homes and interrogated, subjected to extreme tests and forced confessions. What followed was nothing short of a nightmare. The town was consumed by paranoia. The accusations of witchcraft were everywhere. No one was safe. Women of all social classes, from elderly widows to respected members of the community, were suddenly accused of being witches. The feverish belief that Satan was at work in the village meant that anyone could be accused of witchcraft, and once accused, the chances of survival were slim. The role of religion in the Salem witch trials cannot be overstated. Puritan leaders, who believed that witchcraft was a direct assault on God's will, used the trials as a tool to assert their authority. Their unyielding belief in the righteousness of their cause led them to interpret every strange occurrence as evidence of witchcraft. Religious fervor combined with the social tensions of the time created a perfect storm for hysteria. Personal grudges, jealousy, and even vendettas played a significant role in the escalating accusations. Many women were accused simply because of old family disputes or the desire to eliminate someone standing in the way of personal ambition. Fear of the unknown, combined with the power of religious influence, led to a frenzy of accusations and trials that spiraled into a massive tragedy. As the witch hunt gained momentum, more and more people were drawn into the web of suspicion. The accused ranged from the most vulnerable in society, poor women, widows, and outsiders, to more prominent members of the community. These included Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who was accused of bewitching the girls, and Tituba, a slave from Barbados, who was the first to be accused. Her confession, coerced through intense pressure and fear, set off a chain reaction of accusations. Tituba's testimony not only saved her life, but also implicated many others. The most terrifying aspect of the trials was that anyone could be accused. It didn't matter if you were innocent or had lived a virtuous life, a single accusation could lead to your arrest and eventual execution. The accused were often subjected to horrific interrogations, including the use of spectral evidence, the testimony of the afflicted girls who claimed to see the accused ghost or specter tormenting them. The trials were a macabre spectacle that captivated the entire community. The court, under the leadership of Judge Samuel Sewell, relied on testimony that would later be regarded as unthinkable. Spectral evidence, in which the accusers claimed to see the specters of the accused harming them, was accepted as valid proof of guilt. This warped the trials into a game of he said, she said, where the words of the accusers, often children, carry more weight than physical evidence or reason. The accused were put through torturous tests, including touch tests, where they were asked to touch the afflicted girls to see if their presence would cause further fits. When a woman was accused, she had no choice but to either confess to the crime and risk execution anyway, or deny it, which often led to a guilty verdict. The accused were taken to the gallows, where they were hanged in public displays of justice. For those whose lives were spared from hanging, imprisonment in filthy, overcrowded cells awaited them, with many dying from exposure and disease. By the end of the Salem witch trials, 20 innocent people had been executed. The families of the accused were shattered, with the survivors left to mourn and cope with the aftermath of such injustice. Some people would later express regret, including Judge Samuel Sewell, who publicly apologized for his role in the trials. But for the victims, the damage was irreversible. The trials left a deep scar on the town of Salem. The fear of witchcraft persisted long after the trials had ended. The memory of innocent lives lost in the name of hysteria haunted the survivors, and the social fabric of the community was forever altered. Salem would never be the same. The Salem witch trials have been the subject of countless myths, exaggerations, and misinterpretations. Over the centuries, much of the history surrounding the trials has been distorted by sensationalist retellings. However, understanding the true events requires peeling back the layers of myth. For example, many assume that the Salem witch trials were a result of a deep belief in witchcraft alone. In reality, the trials were more a product of the toxic combination of paranoia, religious fervor, and personal rivalries. The trials also had little to do with witches practicing dark magic, as the Puritans feared. They were about power, control, and fear of the unknown. The legacy of the Salem witch trials is a haunting reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and the abuse of power. This dark chapter in history serves as a warning of what can happen when fear overrides reason. In the aftermath of the trials, the people of Salem were forced to confront the terrifying consequences of their actions. The trials were eventually declared a mistake, and the surviving victims were compensated, though this came too late to undo the suffering that had already been caused. The damage was done, and Salem was left to reckon with the legacy of its own madness. Salem is now a place where tourists can visit and walk through history. At the Salem Witch Museum, visitors are taken on a journey through the events that led to the trials, the horrific trials themselves, and the aftermath of this dark time. Historic sites, including the old courthouse and jail, still stand as chilling reminders of the fear that gripped this community centuries ago. Despite the tragic history, Salem has come to embrace its past. Every year, the town hosts events and celebrations that commemorate the trials, with tours, reenactments, and educational programs that aim to shed light on this dark chapter in history. The Salem witch trials left a lasting impact on American society and culture. They serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of paranoia, misinformation, and the abuse of power. The trials also raised important questions about the intersection of religion and law, and the importance of due process and evidence in legal proceedings. The Salem witch trials also serve as a cautionary tale for modern society. Paranoia, misinformation, and fear-driven scapegoating still plague communities today. From the Red Scare of the 1950s to modern day, witch hunts driven by political or social factors, the lessons of Salem remain painfully relevant. The story of the Salem witch trials is a chilling reminder that we must remain vigilant in the face of fear-driven injustice. It calls on us to question what we are told, to critically examine evidence, and to always defend the rights of the accused. The Salem witch trials were a dark chapter in American history, one that still haunts us today. The fear, the hysteria, and the senseless loss of life left an indelible mark on Salem and the world. But in the echoes of this tragedy, we find a powerful lesson about the dangers of unchecked fear, religious extremism, and the misuse of power. The trials serve as a timeless reminder of the importance of justice, reason, and the need to protect the rights of the innocent. As we reflect on this haunting history, we must never forget the lessons of Salem. The specter of the witch trials still lingers in our society, and it is up to us to ensure that we never repeat the mistakes of the past.
On a remote farm in rural Germany, a brutal crime occurred that would leave an entire family dead, their house eerily silent, and the case unsolved for decades. The Hinterkaifeck murders, a chilling mystery that has baffled investigators for over a century. What happened on that cold March night in 1922? Who was responsible for the gruesome deaths of the Gruber family? And why has this case remained unsolved for so long? In the small, isolated farming community of Hinterkaifeck, a tragedy was about to unfold. The Gruber family lived on a farm about 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. It was the perfect place for a quiet life, or so it seemed. On the farm lived 6 people: Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, his wife, Kazilia, their daughter, Victoria, and her 2 children, 7-year-old Joseph and 2-year-old Kazilia, and the family maid, Maria Baumgartner. They lived a simple, secluded life. But in the months leading up to March 1922, strange things started happening. Andreas Gruber, a farmer in his late 60s, reported disturbing events in the days before the murders. He discovered strange footprints in the snow leading to his barn, but none leading away. He also claimed to hear noises in the attic, and his daughter, Victoria, noticed unfamiliar footsteps in the house. But despite his unease, the family dismissed these occurrences as nothing more than the imaginations of a worried mind. The fact that Andreas Gruber noticed these unusual signs of intrusion, and yet no one took them seriously, is one of the most chilling aspects of the case. The family ignored their instincts, and that would have dire consequences. March 31, 1922, the night of the murders. The entire family and their maid, Maria, would be found dead in the farmstead in a way that suggested the killer had been hiding in the house for days, waiting for the right moment to strike. The family and the maid were slaughtered in their own home. The killer or killers used a pickaxe, a brutal and terrifying weapon. One by one, the victims were attacked, with the first being Andreas Gruber, who was struck while in his bed. His wife, daughter, and grandchildren met the same grim fate. Their maid, Maria Baumgartner, was also killed the same night. The bodies were discovered several days later by a neighbor, who became concerned after not seeing the family. When authorities arrived, they were horrified by the carnage. But what struck them as odd was that there were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, and no valuables were missing. The investigation uncovered baffling clues. There were no fingerprints at the scene, and the murderer seemingly moved throughout the house undetected for days. In fact, it was later determined that the killer may have stayed in the attic for several days, living off food from the family's supplies. The house was eerily undisturbed during that time. Despite extensive investigations, the police found no direct evidence linking any suspect to the murders. Several people were questioned, including the family's neighbors, but no one had anything useful to add. And then there were the mysterious phone calls, strange, unexplained events that only added more confusion to the case. There was a key theory that emerged early on, that the killer may have been someone who had worked on the farm in the past. The family had recently hired a new maid, and there were rumors about the family's relationships with outsiders. In fact, there were whispers about an affair between Victoria Gruber and a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, which could have played a role in the murders. One of the most intriguing leads came from Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a local farmer who had been romantically involved with Victoria. Some believed that he may have had a motive to murder the family. However, despite being investigated, he was never officially charged with the crime. In fact, no one was. As years passed, the Hinterkaifeck murders remained unsolved. Some even speculated that the killer could have been a relative or someone the Grubers had trusted. But no one ever found enough evidence to make an arrest. And today, the case remains one of Germany's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Despite extensive investigations, rumors, and theories, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved. The house itself, now abandoned, stands as a haunting reminder of the brutality and mystery surrounding the deaths of the Gruber family and their maid. What happened that night? Who was the killer? And why has this case remained open for so long without an answer? The Hinterkaifeck murders continue to puzzle investigators and capture the imaginations of true crime enthusiasts around the world. A century later, the mystery endures unsolved, unanswered, and forever chilling.